Welcome to the Mental Health Merienda, your snack size guide to mental health wellness. I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist specializing in neuropsychology.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker. So, a breakup or divorce can be one of the most stressful and emotional experiences in our lives. For whatever reason the split may be, the breakup of a relationship can turn your whole world upside down and trigger all sorts of painful and unsettling emotions.
Divorce or breakup can be extremely painful because it represents several losses. So it's a loss of companionship, shared experiences, loss of financial, social, emotional support, loss of hopes, plans, and dreams. Everything is disrupted. Your routine, your responsibilities, your home, your relationships with extended family and friends, and even your identity.
Yeah, a breakup also brings uncertainty about the future. So, what's life going to be like now without your partner? Are you going to find someone else? Are you going to end up alone? And so, all of these unknowns can often seem a lot worse than being in an unhappy relationship.
Definitely. And I think that's why a lot of people stay in unhappy relationships much longer than maybe they should.
Yeah, the unknown is scarier.
It is. It is really scary. And so when we think about the research, because I think a lot of people, when they're going through breakups, they feel maybe very alone or they feel like they're really having a lot more trouble than other people. But the research, in terms of, there's a 2019 study published in the Public Library of Science journal, which surveyed 71 people. So it's a fairly small sample size, but 71 people who were 0 months, which I think 0 months just means a few weeks. So a few weeks up to 5 months post breakup. And they found that 70.4% reported they still think about their ex partner daily. And so that's definitely a big majority. 25.4% experienced physical complaints after the breakup. So I think with that, they're probably talking about stomach pain, chest pain, or these different kinds of more somatic complaints that you can have that are related to emotional distress. And then 26.8% of respondents endorsed symptoms corresponding with depression. So ranging from mild depression to severe clinical depression. That's pretty
Oh, wow.
significant.
Yeah. And you
Mm.
know what? 5 months post breakup's not even that long. If
No,
you think
it's
about
not.
it, I don't think
No,
it's
I
that long.
don't think so. I don't think so either.
Yeah, I would think some,
Mhm.
especially depending on how serious the relationship was to certain people, 5 months. Yeah, I would think a little bit longer than 5 months, but I think this is good to start off with, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you're
Yeah,
definitely not alone. It's essentially what we're trying to say with those statistics.
yeah, definitely. And we can see from this data that healing from a past relationship can even develop into a depressive episode, just like you said, especially in the early stages after a breakup. So, why is it that some relationships are so much harder to get over than others? And what are qualities that make it so that some people struggle more than others through this healing process? So, there's actually 5 common behaviors that may be sabotaging your healing processes. So the first one is something called catastrophizing. So when we're catastrophizing, we're framing a painful situation as a worst case scenario. So you're looking at it through a lens of helplessness and pessimism. So during that breakup, you might be kind of like in this emotional spiral where you exaggerate the situation. So, for example, you're telling yourself things like, oh, I'll never get over this pain. I'm never going to find anyone else. I'm going to feel like this forever. He or she was the one, and I'm not going to find anyone as great as them. So that's kind of some examples of that catastrophizing behavior, where you're making that situation even in your mind worse, and it's like the worst case scenario. There's nothing else, worse than this, and that can obviously sabotage your healing process.
It's an extreme. It's thinking in big extremes.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And then the second behavior that could sabotage your healing process is something called ruminating. And I think this is actually pretty common. I think everyone who's been through a breakup's probably done this before. But when we say ruminating, this is constantly thinking about your breakup in hypotheticals or obsessing about, what should have happened instead of what actually happened. And in doing that, you're never able to get out of that mindset and you're never able to grow beyond that relationship because you keep thinking, oh, if I just did this differently, then we would have stayed together. If I just didn't say that, then this would have never happened. So you're preventing yourself from moving on because you keep thinking like, if I did this, then this could have happened. Like you're trying to like shift that thinking. And then you're constantly like, your mind is just very obsessed and focused on, again, the breakup and the what ifs. And then the result of incessant ruminating is that it takes a life of its own. So it starts imprinting like other memories or shifting memories of, what could have happened, what actually happened. And then it could start to become part of, your identity. So that's also something that starts to become really unhealthy.
Yeah, it sounds like people, and when they're in that state of mind, that rumination, that they're stuck. They're mentally, emotionally stuck in that past relationship. And so I can definitely see how that makes it very hard to get over that relationship, and even harder to eventually move on and find someone else and date someone else. And I think when we're talking about these factors, it's that there are some people that either certain relationships bring up these factors, like catastrophizing and rumination, and the remaining ones that I'll talk about, but also that some relationships make you more likely to sabotage the healing process. And so, uh, yeah. And so the third one that we have is just refusing to accept that it's over. And so it makes sense that in order to move on, you have to be able to let go of this relationship. But unfortunately, the reality is that many of us we hope for a chance of reconciliation. I know myself. I've definitely been there. I won't lie. I've been in that situation where, I hope this works out. Maybe it's just a break. Some couples just take a break, and
Right.
there's a
We've,
chance.
we've all been there. This
Yeah,
is not just, one person. We've all been there. Or just like, I'm
Mhm.
sure, in a week, they'll cool off, they'll call back, we'll get back on track. Yeah.
They'll
We've all
change their
told ourselves
mind.
these things. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as long as you expect to get back together with your ex, you will continue to close yourself off to new experiences. And when I say new experiences, I'm not just referring to new partners in the future, new dating, but just new experiences with your friends, with your family, just with yourself, even discovering, maybe rediscovering things that you used to enjoy before you were with your partner. And so related to that, number four is losing your sense of self. It's not hard to imagine how couples can, particularly those whose lives are very intertwined, who have been together for a very long time, they may experience something kind of like an identity crisis when their relationship ends. And research shows that after a breakup, I found this very interesting, that people generally feel more unsure of who they are as a person. And specifically, the research has shown that shortly after a breakup, when you ask someone, who are you? Like kind of like, tell me about yourself, that people have more trouble answering that question.
Oh, that is interesting. And that makes a lot of sense because, especially if you've been with someone for a long time, you start to maybe adopt certain interests that they introduced you to, and then you now have those interests. And maybe you had some sort of like social functioning where you kind of did things together with a group of friends or with like family members and things like that. And now like, oh, am I going to still be on this team? My husband and I used to be on this like, team together, and now we got divorced. So what does that look like? So yeah, and especially to now shifting relationships, friendships, family. Yeah, that I can see how that happens. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, me too. And then the fifth one is hearing only what you want to hear. And so, in the initial stages after a breakup, it's very healthy. It's very normal to lean on your friends, talk to your friends, have them as kind of a sounding board, listeners. And it's an essential part of the healing process. But sooner or later, a friend might start to say things that you don't want to hear. And so they might challenge some of your thinking. They might say, well, actually, I think maybe you were in the wrong on that one. And so that honest feedback, if you can't receive that, then that'll really hurt you in the long run. It'll hurt your healing over the relationship, and it might even hurt your friendships.
Yeah, and it kind of plays into that kind of just being stuck. Again, like maybe other people are trying to help you move forward and maybe you're not ready to or you don't want to, and you're just kind of staying in that stuck phase of healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, despite our best efforts, most people will eventually feel distress in the early stages of after a breakup. So, how do we get through it? What can we do to get through it and get through that recovery phase? So, there are 5 strategies that are recommended by a psychologist by the name of Dr. Janice Vilhauer. So, the first strategy is to cut off contact. So, even just doing this initially, doing this for a little while in the beginning, So no, you do not need to be friends, especially right after it happens. Many people hang on to that idea of friendship and being friends with an ex because of the idea of completely letting them go seems too hard and too overwhelming. But it's really hard to be friends when, in a genuine way, at least, if you haven't fully healed. And that goes for both parties. So both parties need to like fully be healed before you can actually be friends and spend time with each other and not have any other feelings or ulterior motives or of getting back together, for example. So, both parties need to have that time apart. And also, something to keep in mind is when you're hurting, you're so vulnerable. So it's really important to protect yourself with healthy boundaries. And that's really just a part of good self care, especially during this time period where you really do need to take care of yourself because it's a vulnerable time. And this is like a real painful time period that you're going to be going through. If you have to remain in contact because of children or maybe pets that you share or other obligations, then know that there is a distinct difference between being friendly, being cordial, being polite, which is fine to do, and also being friends. So just making sure you're setting those healthy boundaries.
I just want to say, Michelle, I think this one is so important. We are saying this one first on purpose because I feel like so myself included. Let me not, let me admit my, my flaws too. Yeah, I've been in that place too. I think it's so hard and it seems so abrupt and so sudden for people to completely cut off their ex. But being friends is not a sign of maturity. Some people say, "Oh, we're mature. We can be friends," when they just broke up days ago. It's not. And obviously having sex with an ex, not great.
Yeah, not a good idea. Let's just
No,
even go
no.
there too.
So we're including that in the friends part. Still, being intimate, not great. Not great for your healing. Not great for your self care. So just don't do it.
Yeah. And then a
Mhm.
practical tip. So other than just don't have sex, it's also a practical tip.
Yeah.
But another practical tip to help you is also, so I know in the age of social media, unfollowing temporarily or just making sure you're not constantly seeing their posts or their pictures, that's also kind of part of this, but politely letting your ex know that you need space and that you'd prefer not to be in contact for a certain time being. Don't ghost them, don't completely cut them off. That's not what we're saying here, but just kind of putting those healthy boundaries and just politely telling them, like, I just need a little bit of space. Like, I need to heal. And they do too. So that's really important for both parties.
Yes, don't ignore their messages. Like, with don't ghost them. You can write back and politely set those boundaries. So that's what we're saying is like, don't just completely ignore them. Politely set those boundaries, which is hard.
Yeah, and hopefully too that they would agree to those boundaries because it would be healthy for both parties really. And then really on both sides, avoiding checking social media, as I said earlier, which might be difficult to do. So sometimes I think unfollowing just for a short period of time, not forever, but that also helps. So you're not constantly getting like bombarded with images and seeing them. It's not allowing you to heal. So that's, an important one.
You can't be hurt by things that you're not seeing. And so if there's things maybe on their social media that would be very hurtful to you, if you unfollow and you or unfriend, unfollow, depending on the platform, whatever the term is, then you're not seeing those images. And so that's the best way to protect yourself in your healing.
Yeah, yeah. And not, potentially re-traumatizing yourself if you end up seeing something that is going to upset you. So, number 2 is to remember the full truth of why the relationship ended. So, a large majority of the pain from a breakup comes from not really the relationship itself, but also it has to do with mourning what the relationship represented, what it could have been. So, those are two different things. So, when the relationship first starts, it often is something that's really like you have those like love feelings, you might see
It's
things through
hopeful,
hopeful, like rose-colored
exciting.
lenses,
Mhm,
exciting.
mhm.
Yeah. And so sometimes you're in this relationship and you can see the potential, you can see what, this relationship could be, what this person could be. And then we always often forget that, who is this person for what they are currently or what the relationship is currently. So we idolize the relationship or we idolize our partner. So it's really helpful in that healing process to remember the full story, not just what we hoped for, not just the, kind of like what we saw in the future, but, the current state. So you're not looking at it just through rose-colored lenses. You're seeing, there is a reason why this relationship ended. There were some things that, I hoped that they would do that, X, but they they haven't gotten there. It's been like, there's been issues kind of along the way. So not to forget, what those issues are.
Yeah, and this one actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the one I mentioned with your friends, like listening to your friends, because I think your friends can be really good at helping you not idealize them too much, and so also be open to that, because if they're trying to help you see things as they really were, and you're cutting them off or just kind of blocking them off, then again, you're really sabotaging your own healing.
Yeah. And a practical tip to help you do this is to make a list of every painful or hurtful thing that you can remember during the relationship. And then don't forget to review it to remind yourself of why the relationship ended. So again, it doesn't have to be that everything was bad. That's not what we're saying here, but it's just to remember that the reality of the relationship, the full picture, not just the happy, lovey-dovey times. There are going to be painful times. That's why it ended. And so not to forget what those are.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And so the third one that we have is acceptance. So what I mean by that is, when someone treats you poorly, or something hurtful happens, it's natural and healthy to feel some anger. But when you hold on to that resentment from past experiences, we take them with us into the future. So that limits your ability to move forward. So I think we can all, think of someone in our lives who maybe has a bit of bitterness, and then it comes off when they date the next person. I can tell you, when I was dating, I definitely met some people that I thought, oh, you're still very bitter about your ex. So
not over that person. Wow. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and I felt that energy from the person, and so having that acceptance. So we're not saying to still be in love with your ex. It's a bit of a middle ground where you're not completely angry at them, but you're also not in love with them. You're just kind of accepting of what happened, and that forgiveness. It's not about letting the person off the hook about his or her bad behavior. It's about your emotional freedom. It's about cutting yourself off from that consistent resentment that brings you down, that affects you in different areas of your life, with your friendships, with future relationships, with work sometimes. And so a practical tip for this, because I think this is a really hard one, is to write down your relationship breakup story. And so you can do this in a journaling prompt. It can help you better understand the events that unfolded, make them less personal, and really make peace with what happened. And so within your story, identify any cognitive distortions or irrational thoughts. We mentioned cognitive distortions way back in our first episode, and likely in our depression episode too. I think in our anxiety and our depression episode. So if you haven't watched those, definitely make sure to check those out. But so these cognitive distortions are irrational thoughts. So there's different kinds, but without getting into all the specifics of it, one kind that's very, very common is anything where you're using the words always, never, and should. Those extreme words are rarely ever representative of what actually really is the objective truth of what objectively happened. They tend to be more irrational cognitive distortions. And so once you identify those, rewrite your story, focusing only on factual information. And try to identify the role that you played, and strive to be forgiving of your ex for their parts in it too.
Yeah. And I think what's key here, what you said earlier, is that about your emotional freedom. You don't want this person that, especially if they treated you badly and they did something that was really awful to the point that it really hurt you and it really angered you. You don't want them to continue to have a hold over you, especially as you've moved on. You want to find someone or find a relationship that's more healthy and happy. It's going to actually bring you joy, and holding onto that resentment is just going to, again, prevent you from doing that or sabotage maybe like a potentially good relationship. So that emotional freedom, I think, is the key part in acceptance.
It really is, yeah. And then fourth is try not to judge your feelings, even if you still love the person. It's okay to experience intense feelings of sadness, anger, frustration, confusion, anxiety. Those will lessen over time. Grieving, it's an essential part of the healing process, of any healing process, really. So allow yourself to feel. Don't push down your feelings. Don't suppress your feelings. Just remember that no matter how strong your grief is, it's temporary. And so it's even normal to still love the person. Moving on from a relationship that is not working isn't always about ending the love that you feel. A good deal of the pain is what we feel when a relationship ends is related to that loss that we perceive. So what Michelle mentioned earlier, a lot of it tends to be that loss of that expectation of those dreams of that, oh, we were going to buy a house together, we are going to get married, we are going to have kids, we were going to move somewhere together, and all of that sometimes can end very suddenly. And so that's very difficult. But if you try to conceptualize that instead of a loss, try to conceptualize it more as a transition, that can really help with easing that hurt.
Yeah, I like that transition versus loss. It's like it's more a positive reframe.
Yeah. And so a practical tip to help you do this, give yourself a specific time frame. So maybe, 2 days, I'm just giving an example, where you will express your feelings fully. So you could cry, you can shout, you can listen to angry music and scream along with it, listen to Adele and sing along with Adele, whatever you want to do. That's fine. And without judgment of your feelings. If you were bawling and crying in a corner, fine. Don't get mad at yourself for it. Allow yourself to not be okay for a while. And so in that time, don't expect yourself to necessarily be as productive at work. Don't expect yourself to respond to all messages, because then if you're putting that burden on top of yourself, then it just makes everything so much harder. And a big one that can be pretty common is numbing your feelings with destructive behaviors like alcohol, drugs, overeating, excessive shopping, casual sex. That's a big one. So it can be hard to identify those sometimes in the moment. You say, oh, I'm just having fun, just enjoying myself. But really, if you find that you're doing that, step back and say, am I trying to numb my feelings from this relationship, or am I actually just going out and having fun? So,
yeah. And I think sometimes people think, oh, a breakup and being sad over a breakup, it's trivial. It's not a big deal. As we've been kind of saying this whole video, it is actually a big deal. It's very painful. Grieving is part of the process. It's so important to allow yourself to heal, to give yourself the space to do that. And oftentimes, I think we're just kind of trying to convince ourselves like, oh, I'm fine. And I'm doing all these things that might be destructive. And we're not fine. So it's okay to just be honest and to give ourselves grace. I think we say that a lot. Give ourselves grace, and just allow ourselves this time period to be sad, and that's okay.
Yeah, and just to say one thing, the feelings will come up somehow. So you can never fully suppress feelings; they come up.
Right, and so tip number 5 is to use this breakup as an opportunity for self-reflection. So taking a step back and thinking about, yourself and, what your needs, what you deserve, believing that you deserve to be in a loving relationship. I think that's true for anybody. You deserve to be in a happy relationship with someone who shares your values, who treats you well. All of that is owed to us. So trying to view yourself and, what you deserve in a positive way, to stop blaming ourselves. Stop, that's just like such a, not a good use of energy, just kind of constantly blaming ourselves for this, what did if I just did this differently, then maybe we could have stayed together like that. As we've been saying, that's not going to help the situation. Blaming yourself only brings out more negative emotions, delays your healing process. Also, you can't expect someone to treat you better than you treat yourself. So that's something that's really important. So you want to make sure, and I think there's I'm going to butcher the saying, but something about you have to love yourself before someone else can love you. I think that's really important here. You show people how you want to be treated. So doing that self-reflection, thinking about, what it is you want, your values, what you deserve is all part of this like self-reflective process. And if the thought of this seems daunting, because your inner dialogue, it might be filled with, that negative self-doubt or negative self-talk, criticism, or your own like inner self-loathing, then something to think about is this might be a good opportunity to think about enlisting the help of a licensed professional. So, in therapy is a helpful space to process some of these feelings and trying to figure out, where is this stemming from? Where has this come from? Because it might not just be coming from this end of the relationship. It might be coming from other more deeper situation.
Yeah, and just to say, I think this is a really big one too. When you're in a relationship, if you have these difficulties with accepting yourself and loving yourself, you can kind of put them aside during the relationship, but in the post breakup phase, you have to believe that you deserve better and that you can have better. And for a lot of people, I think that's something that really prevents them from finding a happy relationship. And sometimes it's subtle and it's kind of subconscious, but even going back to the one that I mentioned before, Michelle, with the self-destructive behaviors. If you're
Mm-hmm.
just going out drinking all the time and casual sex, like things like that. Sometimes what they show is that maybe I don't think I deserve any better. Casual sex, I think, is a big one, actually.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
maybe I just don't think I deserve any better, and this is all that I can have. And so, really, that self reflection, take that time to really explore that. And if you do find that even the thought of being with someone who treats you well and that will really love you, even if that thought seems, oh no, I won't, no, that won't happen, then
Yeah.
really explore why, and definitely, consider seeing a professional.
Yeah. And I think too, as part of self-reflection, it's also thinking of patterns, right? So, do you have other relationships that ended that where you really then started to engage in that destructive behavior? Or has this been a pervasive thing where you think that you don't deserve, better than you probably do deserve? So again, I think that's the time where taking a step back and maybe seeing if, therapy, again, with a licensed professional might be beneficial. I know in my practice, I've seen a lot of people who they're kind of towards the end of a relationship or processing the end of a relationship. And, it's often, I think, really helpful just to see where those feelings are coming from. And then a practical tip that you can do for this is to focus on doing positive things for yourself, such as getting exercise. I think we're always big proponents of exercise as self-care here, spending time with your loved ones, focusing on a new hobby, basically just reinvesting that time to a passion maybe that you've been wanting to explore for some time. And now you have the opportunity to do so. So all of these things are things that you're doing for yourself. Again, you're kind of refocusing that time you spend maybe ruminating on this person, and doing something that you want to do, something that's going to bring you joy. Just doing something, I think in the research that we've seen, Adeline has said that, as long as you're doing something instead of just kind of sitting and ruminating, that's going to
Mm.
help your healing process immensely.
And help you get unstuck.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's all that we have for today's episode on how to heal from a past relationship. I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker.
And if you liked our show on how to heal from a past relationship, please make sure to like this episode and subscribe to our channel so you can receive notifications when we release our weekly episodes. We would really appreciate it. And we would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you been through a difficult breakup recently? How have you been healing from it? Have you used any of these tips that we have shared today? Or do you hopefully plan on using some of them now that you've heard about them from us? Definitely let us know in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say.
And thanks so much for tuning in to Mental Health Merienda, your snack-sized guide to mental wellness. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.